Shalom and thank you for joining me. This is Yitzhak Reuven. It is Sunday, October 25th. It is the 7th day of the Hebrew month of Marcheshvan. And as you can see, myself and a group of another between 15 and 20 fellow Jews have entered the Temple Mount and are beginning our visit to the Temple Mount today. I'm here today especially to honor the 855th anniversary of Maimonides' ascent to the Temple Mount, which we're going to talk about as we walk around the Temple Mount today. And the actual ascent took place yesterday on the 6th of Marcheshvan. Yesterday was Shabbat, and the Temple Mount is currently closed to Jews on Shabbat, so there was no way that any of us could be on the Temple Mount yesterday. Many Jews have ascended the Mount today already in honor of the anniversary of Rambam's ascent 855 years ago. It's the afternoon here in Israel. In fact, today, last night, we actually changed our clocks in Israel. We set them back an hour as we officially entered into winter time, meaning the hours that the Temple Mount is open to Jews has changed. They're the winter hours now, which I believe is from 7 to 11 in the morning, and it is 12:30 to 1:30 in the afternoon. And we've just entered. It's 12:30 right now. Beautiful day. There was a little bit of rain this morning, so it's a nice clear sky with some clouds that block the sun a bit, which I think will make the video quality a little bit better than it is sometimes in a Temple Mount when the sun is very, very strong. So it's very exciting to be up here today. As you can see, we're progressing as I'm talking. We're passing right now the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on our left. We're in the southern end of the Temple Mount. I'm not going to talk too much about the topography of the Temple Mount today. I really want to focus on the Rambam. Now, I refer to him sometimes as the Rambam, sometimes as Maimonides. In Hebrew, he's also known as Moshe ben Maimon. It's all the same person. Moshe ben Maimon is one of the greatest minds in Jewish history. In fact, there's a saying that says, from Moshe to Moshe, there was none like Moshe. The first Moshe being, of course, Moses, who brought down the law from Mount Sinai. The second Moshe referring to Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides. He was born in the year 1135 in Spain. He was born into Islamic Spain, Muslim Spain, and a new government, Muslim government, took over when he was 13, a fanatic government that decreed that all the Jews needed to either convert to Islam or face death. So, disguising themselves as Muslims, Moshe and his family fled Spain and moved to Morocco, to the city of Fez, where he spent the next number of years. I'm not going to go too into depth into the history of Moshe ben Maimon, his biography. We've been posting different posts over the past few days, and we'll continue to post a few more today about Maimonides, his history of his life and times, his trip to Israel, and his ascent to the Temple Mount. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today. But as I'm saying, if you want more details, you can go to our Facebook page, the Temple Institute Facebook page, and learn more about Maimonides. So we are, again, we've entered the Temple Mount from the southwestern corner, the gate known as the Mughrabi Gate, which is actually an Arabic term, which means Western Gate, because it's on the western side of the mount. It's also referred to sometimes as the Rambam Gate, in honor of Rambam. Not that I believe we have any knowledge as to which gate he entered when he went up to the Temple Mount, but this is the gate that Jews enter today. There are, I believe, 12 gates to the Temple Mount, and only one is open for non-Muslims in the current situation on the Temple Mount, which we hope will change very, very soon, encouraging more and more Jews and people of all faiths to ascend the Temple Mount and be in the holiest place on earth, the place where the two holy temples stood and where the third holy temple will someday stand. May it be soon in our days. And where Rambam ascended 855 years ago. So how do we know about Maimonides' trip to the land of Israel and to the Temple Mount? We know because he wrote all about it. Rambam set out for Israel from Morocco by ship, and he set out on the 14th day of the month of Iyar in the Hebrew year 4925. It was May 5th, 1165. And he describes in one of his letters the trip, a perilous trip. There was a storm at sea. Rambam thought that he was going to lose his life. He thought the boat was actually going to capsize. And he describes this. And then he was able to land in the northern port city of Akko. The city of Akko is just north of the city of Haifa in Israel. He landed there, where he was met by someone who he had already been in correspondence with, who greeted him, and he spent some time in Akko, and then on the fourth day of the month of Marcheshvan in the year 1165, it was the Hebrew year, I don't have the Hebrew year right here, in the year 1165, Rambam set out with others, and I believe his son and maybe other members of his family were with him, and they set out from Akko to Jerusalem. It was a 2-day journey, and a very perilous journey. You have to recall that at this time in these years, the Crusaders had control of the land of Israel, and it was a very perilous time for Jews in the land. They were not treated well by the Crusaders. So Rambam came with tremendous risk to his own life, came to Israel, and journeyed onto Jerusalem. I have this in my hand. I'm reading a letter from Rambam that he writes, on Sunday, the 3rd of the month of Sivan, which was May 23rd, 1165, I left the ship in peace at the port of Akko, having been delivered from destruction, and arrived in the land of Israel. I made a vow that this would henceforth be a day of joy and happiness, in which I would enjoy a festive meal and give charitable gifts to the poor, as would my household, until the end of time. I'm going to interrupt Rambam here. There is actually a concept in Judaism of the festive meal, Sudat Mitzvah, in which you to honor a very special mitzvah that you merited to perform in your life, that on that day, on the anniversary of that day, you actually have a su'udah, a formal meal in order to honor this day. And as Rambam says, you also give tzedakah, you give charity to those who need it. And he did this for himself throughout the rest of his life. He honored this day with this festive day, Sudat Mitzvah, until the day he died, and he also commanded it to his progeny, to his descendants, to the end of time. I'm going to continue now with Rambam's own words. On Tuesday, the 4th day of the month of Marcheshvan, in the year 4926 from the time of creation, I left Akko and set out for Jerusalem, encountering many dangers along the way. I entered the great and holy house, and praying there on Thursday, the 6th of the month of Marcheshvan, which was October 21st, 1165. The great and holy house is an expression which refers to the holy temple. And so Rambam describes he came to Jerusalem and he went up to the Temple Mount and prayed there. Now, he didn't pray in the temple, of course. The temple was destroyed. But he prayed in the presence of the temple, of the holy temple, where the temple stood. Just like today when we go up to the Temple Mount, we we are praying, the temple isn't there, but we envision the temple, we feel the temple, the Shekhinah, the presence of Hashem is there. So even though the temple physically isn't there, the experience, it's a very powerful experience, is one of being in close proximity to this point on earth where God's presence, the Shekhinah, is most powerful, most manifest, most felt. So the Rambam's using this expression that he entered into the great and holy house and prayed there as an expression of his of the power of being in that spot and praying there. Now he would continue from Jerusalem, and 2 days later enter Hebron, the city of Hebron, where he would pray again at the Machpelah cave, the cave of the patriarchs, where the patriarchs of the Jewish people, our patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people, are buried. And again, he also later in his letter, he said that the day that he went up to the Temple Mount and prayed there, the 6th of Marcheshvan, is also, he declared it to be a festive day that he would honor for the rest of his life, and called upon his progeny to honor throughout the end of time. I've been told, and I can't verify this, I've been told that Rambam, Maimonides, does have descendants to this day. I don't know where they live, but that they do, to this very day, honor these particular days according to Rambam's decree, and they have a festive meal on these particular days. So Rambam came up to the Temple Mount on this day, and he prayed here. And right now, we came in on the southwestern side of the Temple Mount. We headed directly toward the eastern side of the mount, and then we traveled northward. Now we're standing directly east of where the temple stood. Now the Dome of the Rock is situated precisely where the temple stood, and so you see it right there. We are directly east of that. If the temple were standing today, we would be standing just outside the gates of the Ezrat Nashim, the women's court, which is the outer court of the Holy Temple complex. And if those gates were open, we'd be looking directly through the second set of gates, the Nicanor gates, which separates the women's court from the inner courts. And we would see, as we gazed past those Nicanor gates, we would see the Mizbeach, the altar. We would probably see an offering being performed on the altar, and beyond that, would be the entrance to the Eichal, to the sanctuary of the Holy Temple. So right now we're standing directly east, and as you can see, my fellow Jews here are engaged in prayer. A new phenomenon here on the Temple Mount, a new phenomenon over these past couple of years, that the police allow us to pray. They're not interfering, and I'm going to pause my narrative right now and join my fellow Jews in prayer.
ואז מגיעים לעזרת נשים. את היד ששמענו על בלוטות מקנות. אז בלוטות מקנות, היו בעזרת נשים? כמו בבית הכנסת, נכון? שם באמת, גם יולדת. דיברנו על יולדת. כן, נכון. אז היולדת, כמו אמא, צריכה להגיד פה משהו. אז היא נכנסה לאיפה. אנחנו מתקדמים. יאללה, בואו.
Now, it's very important to bear in mind that when Rambam ascended the Temple Mount 855 years ago, he wasn't the first one. He wasn't a radical. He wasn't doing something that was unheard of. He was doing something that was very heard of, that it was done. In every generation, Jews had ascended the Temple Mount since the time of the destruction of the Holy Temple. It's been recorded, and it's a known fact that Jews, when they were allowed to, by whoever was ruling the land, they would ascend and enter the Temple Mount. And for many, many centuries, they were allowed to. So Maimonides wasn't setting a precedent. He was simply fulfilling a commandment that he was able to fulfill in the tradition of many who had done it before him. Now, when the Ottomans took control of the land of Israel in the 16th, 15th, 16th century, at a certain point they forbid Jews from going up to the Temple Mount. So for a few centuries before the modern era, before the 20th century, when Jews began returning in large numbers to Israel, for a few centuries Jews had not been permitted to go up to the Temple Mount. So the tradition of going up to the Temple Mount had stopped. And Jews were, the place they were allowed to pray was at the Western Wall, which was at that time was a very small area. It was, there was a neighborhood, houses were built there right against the wall. And so it was a very, very small area that Jews could actually approach and be that close to the Temple Mount, to the Holy Temple. But Jews, before they were forbidden by the Ottomans, and in times when they weren't forbidden by other rulers in the land, Jews would go up to the Temple Mount. That was the thing. It was known. And in the 16th century, the Ridbaz, Rabbi David ben Zimri, he actually, in an answer to people who questioned him, he actually marked out where on the Temple Mount it was permissible for Jews to go and where it was forbidden. And he had a perfect understanding of the topography of the Temple Mount, all the buildings that stood then, stood today. So he obviously had been there, was familiar with it, and he described the areas that were forbidden, the areas that were permitted, and we use his descriptions today as an aid in order to determine where we can go, where we can't go. Now we have walked up toward the northern end of the Temple Mountain. We're going to start heading westward. Again, I don't know we don't know which gate Rambam entered when he came to the Temple Mount 855 years ago, but we do know that he would have walked in the same direction that we're walking in, because these are his instructions. These are the halachot of being on the Temple Mount that he wrote down in a very, very practical format. Of course, he didn't make up these halachot, God forbid. He learned them, studied them from earlier sources, mainly the Mishnah and Gemara. We are continuing walking eastward, and we are now getting close to where we're going to be directly north of the area where the temple stood and where the courtyards stood, and we're about to head in that direction. So we're heading a little bit southward now to get as close as we can, al pi halacha, according to Jewish law, as close as we can to the area where the temple stood and where the courtyard stood. And at this point, I'm going to actually focus on what we're seeing as we draw closer. Okay, now we're directly north of where the temple stood. The temple stood where the Dome of the Rock stands today is directly over the Even Hashtiyah, the foundation stone. A foundation stone was found in the Holy of Holies. Now the Holy of Holies was the western end of the temple. The temple itself was a bigger structure, a bigger building than the dome, much taller, much larger building, facing east to west. And right now you can see those pillars. You see some arches in the picture, in the camera, and that is more or less where the Levitical choir would have stood when playing and singing, accompanying the offerings. Where they stood was just on the inside of this inner courtyard that we're looking into. They stood just inside the Nicanor gate. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the Nicanor gates were the gates which was the entrance between the women's court, Ezrat HaNashim in Hebrew, and this inner courtyard. And on the steps that led down from the Nicanor gate into the inner courtyard, the Levites stood, played their instruments, and sang accompaniment to the offerings, the daily offerings, and of course all the festival offerings, the Rosh Chodesh, the new moon offerings, etc., etc. I have to say it's been a very, very beautiful experience here in the Temple Mount today. The police have been very gracious, as they should be, and have not rushed us, and we've had plenty of time to pray and plenty of time to speak words of Torah, and people are engaged in prayer without being hassled by the police. And it's a beautiful day, and it's a very, very, very special feeling to be up here today on this momentous day, even though it's a day after the momentous day. But it's always a momentous day when we're up on the Temple Mount. You can see some people drinking from the water fountain, and that's also something new. Until very recently, the police would not let us drink from the water fountain because it was offensive to the Muslims. It's really not offensive to the Muslims. It was offensive to the Muslim Waqf. And the Muslim Waqf is in control of Jordan and greatly influenced, of course, by the Palestinians. And it is a very hostile element. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, now I'm looking again into this inner courtyard. There are those archways where the Levites stood. You see that little cupola there? Where that smaller dome is more or less where the altar stood, the great stone altar that the offerings were on. What we're looking at now in this northwestern corner of this courtyard is where the animals were brought to be slaughtered. The animals were slaughtered and prepared before they were brought up onto the altar, where they were placed in the fire, in the altar fires. So to this very day, we have a very, very clear view where all this took place and where, God willing, all this will take place again one day. Now we're moving onward. We're heading westward to the western side of the Temple Mount. We're staying very close to this line of buildings, which is really the separation between the inner courtyard and where we are, where we're able to go. Oftentimes the police make us go a little further away, but we're actually getting to go very close right now. Now, where these buildings are on our left, where they're standing now, once stood all the chambers that surround it, the Holy Temple. The chambers sort of formed a massive wall, as it were, around the temple, but it wasn't a wall. They were actually buildings, and you can check on our websites the illustrated tour of the Holy Temple and get a very, very in-depth description of where everything stood. We've come now to another area that's open that we can again look into, this inner courtyard. We're going to proceed from here very quickly, I believe. and continue westward. But again, there's that cupola, that small little dome, where I said before, more or less the altar stood. The altar stood just east of the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple entrance, of course, faced eastward. And on the far western end of the Holy Temple was where the Holy of Holies was, where the Ark of the Covenant rested on the foundation stone. Foundation stone, of course, is understood as being the center, truly the center of the world, the center of the universe, the center of creation, the point of creation. And from that foundation stone upon which the Ark of the Covenant stood emanates the Shekhinah, God's presence in our world. That is the portal, as it were, through which God's presence enters and fills our world. Again, now we're continuing westward, and as I said before, we're staying very close to these inner courtyards. And in a moment, we will turn southward. The last leg of our trip around the Temple Mount. As I said before, it's the traditional way that one enters and walks around the Temple Mount when there is no temple. And again, we are performing a commandment here, a positive commandment, more than one, but the main commandment we're performing here is called Mora Mikdash, which means showing reverence for God in the place of His holy temple. And as Rambam explained in the Mishnah Torah, that this is a commandment that is to be performed whether there is a holy temple or whether there isn't a holy temple. It's not dependent on the holy temple being built, so it's an obligation really, and not to mention a merit and a tremendous honor and privilege to be able to do this. And many thousands of Jews are coming up to the Temple Mount these days to go onto the Temple Mount. Right now we have turned the corner and we are walking southward on the western side of the Temple Mount, west of where the temple stood. These large stones that we're walking along, these very large stones, are actually stones from the period, the Hashmonaim period of the Holy Temple, in the time of the Maccabees. Before the Temple Mount was expanded by King Herod, these large stones that you just saw were the outer wall, the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount. That's how much Herod expanded it. It was an area of, I think, 500 amot by 500 amot, which I think would have been about 250 meters or 300 meters by 300 meters or something like that, the original area of the Temple Mount. Herod expanded it vastly, and if I'm not mistaken, it today is, I think, 37 acres, and it's, I forget the exact number, it's the equivalent of something like 25 American football fields, the actual expanse on the Temple Mount Plaza, which actually is the largest man-made plateau in the world. So we are now walking southward along the western side of the Temple Mount. We're still north, by the way. We're still far north of where the Western Wall Plaza is, because the Western Wall Plaza is despite the fact that it's been expanded since 1967, when Israel liberated the Temple Mount, it's still only a tiny segment of the entire western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. So even when we approach, as we're going to approach in a minute, we're going to approach to where we are directly west of the temple, the Holy Temple, where the Holy Temple stood. And even there, we are still just north of the Western Wall Plaza. If you've ever been inside the Western Wall tunnels, there's a point where you get to where you're standing below, but right opposite where the Holy of Holies was. And that, of course, is north of where the Western Wall Plaza is. But we're going to be in that same point in just a moment. But of course, we're not going to be underground. We are going to be on the temple still. And in just a moment, we're going to be there. We're going to pause. And we'll have more to say when we get there. So here we are, arriving just due west of where the Holy of Holies was. Again, we're looking, that open doorway really looks into where the Even Hashtia, the foundation stone, is to this day. And the whole reason why the Dome of the Rock was built where it's built was to preserve, to honor this place of the foundation stone, the place where the Ark of the Covenant stood. It was built in the 7th century by the Muslim conquerors, but they made a point to build it right there to preserve and honor this spot. But here we are standing directly opposite where the Holy of Holies was. Again, I said before, the Holy of Holies was in the westernmost part of the Holy Temple. The Kohanim, the temple priests, would enter from the east. They would go through a sort of an antechamber known as the Ulam, and then into the Kodesh, the sanctuary, where the golden altar or golden incense altar stood, where the golden menorah stood, and where the golden table of the showbread stood. And only on Yom Kippur would the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, actually enter into the Holy of Holies, where he would place the Ketoret incense offering upon the Even Hashtia, upon the foundation stone in front of the Arona Brit, in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And so if he were there right now, if we could imagine the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, standing right now facing the Arona Brit, the Ark of the Covenant, from the east facing westward, we would be looking directly at him and he'd be looking directly at us, from a bit of a distance, of course. So the bottom of the steps here, again, is as close as we are permitted by halacha, by Jewish law, to get to where the Holy of Holies was. There's been a lot of excitement here in Israel, especially among we who go up to the Temple Mount by the Abraham Accords, by the new agreements with the Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, and there seem to be another few countries on the way. And it's very important that we welcome these Muslims from these countries who have made peace with Israel to join us here on the Temple Mount. Ki Beiti Beit Tefillah L'Kol Ha'amim, ki my house is a house of prayer for all the nations. And of course, these are our friendly nations, and we would love to go up to the Temple Mount with them. And I invite any citizens from the Emirates or from Bahrain who are coming to Jerusalem to go to the Temple Mount to contact the Temple Institute, and we would love to take you on a tour of a Jewish tour of the Temple Mount, and teach you about the history of the Temple Mount from our perspective, and also to learn. And again, it's good to know that there are Muslims who want to come to Jerusalem, want to come to the Temple Mount and pray with us and be with us and be part of this amazing thing that's happening in the world today, which is a return to the Holy Temple, which is happening. And we don't need to be threatened by the Muslim Waqf, who is very hostile to any Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, and who is being put into a corner now because we're making friends. We're making friends in this part of the world, and our friends are joining us in prayer and praying for peace and praying for brotherhood. on the Temple Mount. It's a very positive thing. We have reached the end of our tour of the Mount, of our visit today, and as you see, as we leave the Temple Mount, we walk while facing the place of the Holy Temple to give honor to the Holy Temple, so people are walking backwards as we exit the Temple Mount. It's been a fantastic visit today to the Mount, filled with teaching, filled with prayer, and it's been great being able to talk about Rambam's visit to the Temple Mount and the importance of it, the importance of Rambam's teachings, and what it means to us to this very day. I thank you for joining me. Have a great week. And thanks for being with me on the Temple Mount.